I'd like to call this council of the whole meeting together. The purpose of this meeting is we're on our last phase of obtaining information and cost estimates with respect to the renovation of the 1969 courthouse facility. We did go through the guaranteed maximum price number 1 and guaranteed maximum price number 2, which there was some savings in the bidding out of the project. And now we're to the third and the largest cost component of the project, which is guaranteed maximum price number 3. So Patrick, if you want to start off and just explain what's going on, and then we can go through the process and find out where do we go from here.
Very good. Yes, thank you, Mr. President. You're correct. On Monday, we did receive from Rulin GMP number 3. The total amount was $7.6 million, which is less than what we had expected, which is good news. I have here with me, this is Mike Schumacher, who's the project manager for Rulin on this project. Also, everyone knows Nancy Nozick from Branstetter Carroll. She came. We appreciate it. I was going to turn it over to Mike now to kind of just present what's all included in GMP3, get it out there, and then we can kind of open it up to questions, discussions, review, whatever. So, Mike?
Sure. Good afternoon, everybody. So, as Council President mentioned, we did GMP1, which was for the early abatement and demolition of the existing interior finishes, mechanicals, etc. GMP number 2 was for some structural and long lead items that we took advantage of trying to get an early jump on. And then GMP number 3 is the mechanical, electrical, plumbing, technology, and more of the finishes inside the building. We put this as the last package to get the design 100%, finish the drawings to get the best level of bidding and coordination. So with that note, we got good coverage. We issued bid packages out to contractors around the area for each of the remaining packages: flooring, painting, carpentry, roofing, fire protection, plumbing, electrical, mechanical, and technology. Again, we did get really good bid coverage, a lot of interest from the local contractors and suppliers, and I think the pricing reflects that. So we summarized those. We did scope reviews with the apparent low bidders, sometimes 2 or 3 times with some of those contractors to make sure that everything was covered, identify any scope gaps or overlaps. And from there, we started to prepare the GMP package to you, Council, and put together a list of clarifications, exclusions, and recommended allowances also, which hopefully everybody's had a chance to review. But, you know, bottom line, we feel like we generated some good savings through the bidding process, through the early work that we did for value engineering to try and save some money where we could and keep the overall integrity of the project. And I think this last bid package takes advantage of all the work that we did up front. But again, I think overall this is a really exciting project. Everything that you guys asked for to be part of the project is still included. There's no real significant cuts to scope or features. The finishes are still intact. It's just, you know, working together with the design team and trying to be smart about some of these details and sequence it. And again, I think we got really good interest from the bidding construction community. So with that, I don't know if there's any other questions that anybody has. Be happy to answer.
Well, thanks. Yeah, when we have, I guess, several questions. I guess we're trying to look at, we're still under sticker shock from the number, because I think if you add in the architect's fees, it's $11,483,743, somewhere around there. Not exact, but it's somewhere close to that. So the question is, you know, we had initially, I think there was $4.8 million in Espresso Project Fund, and we had $4.4 million, I think we had in the 301 account, which gets us to about $9.2 million. So we have a difference there of a couple $1 million. So the question is, we got to go look back and you know, discuss this and talk about first the funding of it, you know, because we have numbers here that you came up with. Is there any way to do any more value engineering or look at things to modify? When you did the bid packages, you know, I know looking at your things, you put in a tariff fee in there and you put in some other things. I guess I just need to know when you're doing your bids, because we do a lot of budgeting too, how much is in there extra? Because I think there's a lot, personally, because you're protecting yourself. If I'm doing a construction manager at risk, I'm gonna bid high to make sure I don't get caught paying an extra $500,000 or something, so we just gotta figure out where we're at in that regard, so we can understand what we gotta do to make this work.
Sure.
And I don't, I understand when you bid it out, and you got your quotes and things from the different contractors, I don't know when you do that, how much of a contingency are in each of those subcontractors' packages, so
Right.
to protect for those things, like we don't tariffs, again, that's on, off, we have no idea what they are. So I don't know what impact that would have, or what the lead time is when those contractors are buying those materials. If they buy it now, is it better? Maybe. If they buy it 4 months from now, is it worse? Nobody knows the answer to that question. So in looking at the numbers here, we're just trying to get a handle on that process of it. We understand by looking at all the breakdown of it, there's a lot of, you got your HVAC, you gotta have that, right? There's got plumbing, you gotta have that, you have electrical, and all that stuff adds up to, $3 to $3.5, $4 million for just the mechanical stuff that you have to operate. And the only things in there that, if we went through the project here, that is finishings, let's say, you have $1.7 million for finishings for the whole building. I think that's kind of what the number rounded out to be, carpet and wood and paint and all, lighting, all that stuff for the finishings. So overall, that's not, to the whole budget, that's not a lot, right? It's a little. So the question is, what do we do? How do we work this out? Is there something we can do? You've been through these projects a lot. What have you seen, or what can you advise us when you have a number like this and you know that it's more than we have? What do you suggest, or what have you seen out there from your experience that has happened based upon, we have no predictability in the economy right now. We have no predictability of what cost of goods will be, but maybe that's why some of the contractors, even though they're locally bidding, they're a little hesitant to really be aggressive.
Sure. A lot of questions there, but I'll try and tackle them. First of all, the way that we'll structure this is anything that's listed in the allowances will not be included in anybody's subcontract. So, for example, the flooring prep allowance, flooring preparation. This is an existing building. There's walls that were demolished and varying surfaces and things that were taken out. So the floor is unlevel. So the flooring contractor only quoted new flooring and what we would call basic minor floor prep. Okay, so he's just going to do a little bit of skim coating and grinding, and he would anticipate putting his flooring down. We are not going to put a flooring prep allowance in his package. The allowance that you see and any of the other allowances will be carried separately, that we'll review and award separately with, with Pat and the architects, all of our collective feedback on what's necessary and what's reasonable.
Hey, Mike, maybe it'd help if you could just give a quick overview of exactly what an allowance is, so everyone understands.
Right. So for example, for the electrical contractor, if you see a number there, that is his bid, and that's the number that we'll carry. He quoted that to us, and that's what will go in his package. There's no fee, there's no markup, there's no special allowances or anything. That's his work per the plans and specifications. If you see an allowance that's carried separately down below, that's something that we feel is reasonable and wise to carry based on the existing conditions, based on what we know. So, for example, another one of the allowances that we included was patching the existing walls. There's areas on the plans where it says existing walls to remain. We know we have to pull out the windows and put new windows in. We know that baseboard heating was removed and it's going to get infilled. There's no way that a contractor could adequately quote exactly what's needed to patch all those walls. So rather than contractor A or B or C all carrying a different allowance, we say we'll carry the allowance so it's apples to apples, and then we'll allocate that money as needed. And maybe it's needed, maybe it's not. The same thing with like the floor prep number or any of the other allowances. We're going to carry that separately, so that way, the technology, the AV package is another example of an allowance. We want to spend some more time with the design team, with the city and the courts, and figure out exactly what's needed there and use it reasonably. But anything that's up above that line is a hard quote from a subcontractor that they will do that work. There's no There's no additional markup that's included in that number from anybody.
So the savings, sir, the way I understand it, would not be on the hard contract. If there would be any savings, when we review it, it'd be on the soft areas that you're talking about.
That's right. And,
Okay.
and a good example that, that Council President brought up was the recommended allowance for material escalations due to tariffs, potential trade war, any sort of supply chain constraints. So if we recommended to carry $150,000, which is roughly like 5% of some of the material on this job, if we said by July, which is literally only 3 months away, we'll know whether that money's needed or not. We'll know, are we in a trade war with China that's drastically affecting our supply chain for rooftop air handlers, things like that? We'll know. Are we gonna need this money or not?
Well, supposedly he's holding off tariffs for 90 days, so if you can get
Right,
it done
there we
before
go.
then.
Let's get some things ordered, but to that point, I would love to say that by July, we'll know what's happening with
Right.
all of these allowances. And to that effect, we could strike them and not carry them, but at that point, we'll be coming back, we know, for unforeseen things, for every one of these items that, maybe we only need 10% of it, but we'll have to come back.
Sure. Thank you very much for your answer.
Question, with regard to the supply chain, is it possible to switch to Europe, for example, to get your AC unit? And I really don't know,
Yeah, I would sure hope that we're not buying much of anything from Europe on this project. Nothing against Europe, but I feel like everything is domestically sourced. There might be some pieces and parts for some mechanical or, electrical gear that I'm not aware of that's, coming from Mexico or China perhaps. But I'm not aware of anything that would be coming from Europe. I mean,
Okay,
Nancy
all right.
didn't spec any high-end marble or, Italian tile or anything like that.
they didn't find it yet, Gary.
No, they did not.
But, okay,
Well, just
okay,
to-
to that point though then, if these things are domestically sourced, why are we worried about allowances for tariffs?
Good question, and the real issue is it could just be a supply chain constraint. If, 50% of the market for condensing units perhaps comes from Mexico, right? And then all of a sudden that's cut off, even though we're still buying American, that just created a supply chain constraint.
Okay, because it's assembled in the United States,
Right,
not
and
necessarily.
not everybody all of a sudden needs
Okay.
an American-made unit, and it's gonna create a supply chain constraint.
Okay, all right, thank you.
If I can add too, along those same lines, they have included an allowance for a portion of the court technology, which we'll be sort of revising as we go over this. Mike mentioned this morning, it'll be one of the last things that we actually go out for. And we will be in a position later to know exactly what we need. So the technology number reflected in this GMP3 is broken into two pieces, one in the hard budget technology line and 320 of that in the allowance. And that gives us some maneuvering room to refine what it is exactly that we need in the courtrooms and otherwise down the line. So that was another way that they were economizing on budget for necessary features in the courthouse.
Now, as the final plan was solidified, I assume, Mike Kovac's not here, so is he okay with the clerk of court's side of everything? Are we?
Yeah, we have been, I'm going to brag a little bit. I think that we have been probably more cooperative than most courts in a unified way in interacting with Randstad and Rulin to make sure that we're all on the same page with these things. Mike has carefully gone over the plans many times. He's independently toured the place over there and met with Nancy or talked with Nancy about the needs of the clerk's office. A lot of changes have been made in accordance with his preferences as well.
Okay. Going through this process that we've gone through, and I was lucky enough to get a sheet, because now it comes down to where the rubber hits the road, right? Money. It's all about money. So the question is, what did we spend so far, and where do we go from here? Well, so far, we spent, according to the current and past expenses related to the renovation of the 1969 building, mainly out of the general purpose capital account, which is the city's 301 account, and the 169 court special projects fund. So far on this project, we spent out of the city $1,388,210, and out of the court special project, $2,108,302. So what does that mean? You know, because when we talked about before, and we've always talked about this, and I pulled out the old notes about how we going to pay for this between the city and the courts. And I have what we talked about, this is back in 2019. This is kind of the minutes of a meeting we had on November 25th, 2019. I questioned, this is me reading from the minutes, I questioned, is everyone on council okay moving forward with the thought of having the special projects fund, the court fund, contribute the money that it currently has, and then anything over and above that would be shared 50-50 between the court and the city. And then, of course, this court, after it collects the money from the special projects fund over the years, would pay back the city on a ability basis. What ability you have, maybe some years it's 20,000, maybe some years it's 50. Who knows what the number is, because you have no idea what the cases are going to be.
No, we do. We have a fairly good
Oh, do
data set. That Special Projects Fund generates probably somewhere between 200 and 225,000 a year
Right, and I think.
at current caseloads.
And we discussed that a portion of that will go to the lease payment, of course, because remember, we've always talked about that the 1969 municipal court building is not a city-only user. It's used by 3/4 of the county. So we've always thought it was unfair that the city would be saddled paying for the county's use of a municipal court.
Well, let me add on that exact point, because I came prepared for a discussion this evening.
Okay, good.
Revised Code 190136 makes this the city's responsibility.
Right.
And it's been that way for 70 years. Now, is it fair? I don't know. I wasn't around when that statute was adopted. But in those cities that were identified as housing municipal courts, some of them are like Lakewood, one city, one court. That's
Yeah,
it.
that makes
That's
sense.
the parameter. But there are plenty of courts like this one that encompass, many different communities, and they're saddled with it.
Yes.
We've looked hard at the statutory formula to see about recouping, but given that we've got 11 townships, none of which are charter townships, our ability to recover those monies from Brunswick and from one of the villages is pretty limited.
Yes.
So, this is the hand that Medina City is holding. Nobody can do anything about that. And I actually, with due respect, I think the 50-50 over and above the special project fund was my idea, not yours. You had to be talked into that. So it's a little unfair. Your minutes may be incorrect. Had I been at that meeting, I might have asked to revise them.
And November 25th, 2019, because
Yeah.
that was the last time we mentioned it, but I have some going back to 14 when Judge Chase was here.
Well, I also have an article here from the Gazette dated February 3rd, 2015, where it was acknowledged publicly that the city was going to issue bonds for any amounts that were over and above available funds. That was reiterated by you, John, in an email that you sent to Dale Chase back on February 23rd, 2016. You actually told him specifically, you said, I do not think, this is a quote from your email, I do not think it is as simple as you paying for whatever the cost of the court will be, as the city has to issue the bonds and be responsible for repayment of the monies borrowed. So I don't know that it's entirely complete to say that we're only working with cash on hand. It has always been anticipated that some borrowing would be done. And in our discussions about financing this project, we've been talking about retiring debt and contributing from the Special Projects Fund to help retire that debt from at least as long as we've been looking at this refurbishment of the 69 courthouse.
That is true, but the good thing is that we're so financially conservative with our money that we saved up enough money, we don't have to borrow money.
If this project can be funded as submitted by Rulin, by the way, let me add this too, and we mentioned this earlier. Not having worked with Rulin before, my only experience is the interactions we've had on this project. They've been outstanding. I mean, these are professionals. These guys do their job well. They have cut $2.2 million out of the original estimate, which I can see gave everybody a degree of nausea. I was like, how are we going to get there? Well, their care and attention to the project has resulted in $2.2 million being trimmed out of that. I think that's outstanding. We're now under $11 million to get the refurbishments done. I remember thinking early on when I saw that $13 million, I thought, man, if we can get this to 11 and change, we're doing well. Well, we're doing better than that now thanks to their hard work. And I'm not trying to leave Branstetter out because all of these are collaborative efforts. But this city chose well in picking Rulin to do this project. They're doing an excellent job.
They've
So
got
the
a
numbers
strong
that you're
history.
looking at here, we have two choices. Either go into this prepared financially to deal with the thing as it unfolds, or make it up on the far side by coming back to all these meetings and quibbling over whether we need additional money to fill cracks in the plywood underfloor. If that's the way you want to do the project, you're going to slow it down and probably make it more expensive. So we went through those allowances this morning in our meeting. I think they've done a responsible job anticipating some of the places where these costs might increase. Can you cut 10% out of all that? Well, maybe, but then the risk of having to come back to council goes up by 10%. So it's 6 of one, half a dozen of the other, how you approach this. But I just want to say from the court's perspective, they've done a great job working with us to make this project affordable and still meeting all the needs of the courts once we get over there.
Well, and I'd like to add on to what you're saying, Judge. I think the city is fortunate to have worked with Nancy on the new county courthouse when we were going to go in there, worked with Nancy and them talking about refurbishing the current Muni court, and Rulin, like I commented, they've got a strong history in Medina County, and we all feel comfortable with them. And I think we do, I know we appreciate the efforts that both of your companies have made to keep the costs in line. My fear is the way the economy is now, and we may have to come back and still make some cuts. I hope not, but I would like to see us move forward because I know the cost is not going to get any cheaper because of the current economic situation.
Amen.
It's not only fearful personally, but for the city and your Muni court, sir. Thank you.
I appreciate that.
Does anybody have any questions regarding, what Rulin has presented, the GMP3 makeup, or questions on anything, the structure of it, or, what's going on with respect to the allowances or the bid packages? Because the next discussion we're going to have is how to pay for it. So I just want to make sure we get the first out of the way, what the comfort level is, everybody. I know we've talked about this. We had a price at the county, if you remember. We were all in at 7.8 million. We were ready to start, and that was the number. And now we're looking at a little different number. It's about 3.5 million more.
And I think we're all disappointed that didn't happen. But in saying that, I do appreciate Rulin's company and Brand Center.
No, I think they did a great job, and the fact that they, at least Brand Center was involved with the county, they know intimately how the involvement is. Because I think we've all agreed that having the courts together,
Right.
the synergy that they have solves a lot of problems, not only for the lawyers who use the courts, but also the people who come and use the courts, because they get so confused. I can't imagine or remember how many times I've heard people say they went to the wrong court, because they come to your court thinking it's the common pleas court, they go to the common pleas thinking it's the municipal court, they have no idea where they're going.
Can I put a punctuation mark on that? My assistant, Jackie, had a wedding anniversary yesterday, and her husband's flowers went to the common pleas court yesterday. So they had to be brought over to our court today, so you're right.
So there's been a lot of confusion, and this hopefully solves it. We've always thought it would be a good idea to have all the operations of the courts together.
And we're sharing costs.
And we're sharing costs in this case, and the security entrance is the big thing. Everybody comes through, it's all secure, we have a little bit better handle on what's going on. Plus, if there's ever an issue that somebody has to go from one court to the other, whatever reason it is, not necessarily a person that's, being charged with a crime or otherwise, but the workers, either the bailiffs or the whomever.
Well, John, you would know, the lawyers
Yeah, the lawyers.
have to run across the street,
Yeah,
we're calling them on the docket, and it's where are they, and they just call, they're in common pleas, they'll be over in 15 minutes, it'll be simple. There are so many economies we're going to realize.
Right.
But you touched on the main point, which is security. We will have a single sally port through which all the transports from the jail will be brought to the courthouse. Secure hallways to both the common pleas and the Medina courthouses, so that those folks come up in secure elevators, are held in secure rooms, and taken in and out of the courtrooms. Much safer for everybody, including the court users.
Right. So I guess to move on then, I guess the question is, okay, what do we have, what money did we have, what money do we have now, and where do we get the additional funds to pay for this? Now, I just wrote up a little bit here, reading the numbers that I gave you. The Court Special Project Fund already contributed 2.1 million, and today, or as of yesterday, I think I got the email, there's $3 million left in the Special Projects Fund, which gives us about $5.1 million. Now, what we always talked about is you pay first of the 5.1, and I said, you know what, well, they got to pay the lease payments, there's other things, My personal opinion is, you have to have at least $500,000 in that account as a balance. You can't drop it to zero. That doesn't make any sense. So my suggestion would be, we say that the court's initial contribution to the project is I have I just say 4.6 million. It goes down a little further than that, but that would be what you have available to put towards the building. So the difference between the 11.3, 11.4 total and the 4.6 is about $6.8 million. That's what we got to come up with, right? So if we agree 50-50, that means the city comes up with about 3.4 and you still owe about 3.4 in that fund. So the question is, we as a city have in our 301 account currently, we have $3.1 million. But if you recall, Keith, I guess you can mention, we're collecting money and we raised the income tax allocation of the account to 5%, I think.
That's right. For this year, partially in anticipation of this project, we increased the allocation to the 301 fund to 5% from it was previously 3.5%. So that 5% represents, on current estimate of income tax, $800,000 a year.
Right.
So we will bring 800,000. So we were looking at maybe 1.2 that we need. That's a year and a half. It's not.
So, but we got a loan money. We have to do an internal note.
Well, let me touch on that maybe later, but
Yeah.
But so the question is, we, on the city side, have the funds available to contribute our share, right? We have the money available. So that's not going to be an issue. So the question is, let's go to the next question. Now we have to lend money or advance money to the special projects fund to cover it so they can pay us back.
what we talked about last year, and I brought this to council and you approved, we retained our bond counsel to work on this with us. The reason is, and I don't want to belabor it, but just to explain it, if you as an individual pay cash for a house and then decide 2 years later you want to get a loan, you can do that. We as a city cannot do that. We can only borrow money for a capital expenditure when we're making the capital expenditure. So if we pay cash for this court and then 2 years from now we think interest rates are really advantageous, we want to get bonds for this, we can't. So I asked and council approved, we've retained our bond counsel to issue what are called bond anticipation notes, which we will simply hold internally because we as the city as a whole have the cash, so we don't need to go out and market these. We just need to hold them internally. The whole purpose of this is just to preserve the ability to borrow, because we have to issue the bond anticipation notes. We have to dot those i's and cross those t's at the time that we're making the capital expenditure. Because like I said, we can't come back and do it 2 years later. So we will send this off to bond counsel, and I was going to suggest at $8 million, because we're at 7.9 on this, plus what we've already spent. We can do 8, 4, and 4 to be paid out of 169 and out of 301, and then issue these bond anticipation notes. Then there's rules in terms of we have to pay those off over a reasonable time, so you can't just carry that $8 million forever. There's got to be a pay down plan and so on, which that's why we hire bond counsel, because that's what they do. So we will bring them in and draw all that up, and then we'll float those notes, we'll float those bond anticipation notes internally. Like I said, we'll just buy them ourselves. But because we've issued them at the front end, then if we do a bond issue in a year or 2 or 3, we can issue this with it.
So let me ask you a question while you're talking about that. In the bond anticipation notes, let's say if a $4 million or $8 million, is there any kind of cost difference in issuing those different amounts of money, or is the cost of issuance the same no matter what the size is? Because I guess the question is, we have the money to cover it. If it costs a lot more to do 8, just because we're not going to do this unless the interest rates go down. We're not.
Right.
It's not going to happen.
I think the cost right now, since we're just going to hold these internally, the cost is going to be bond counsel, which is going to be pretty much a flat fee. So I don't think it really makes any difference.
I agree.
Going forward, and to John's point, I have always lumped our bond issues together because when we do a bond issue, there are issuance costs. Some of them are scale, they're a percentage, but some of them are just a flat dollar amount. So it's a lot cheaper to do a bond issue on a per dollar basis. It's a lot cheaper to do a $20 million bond issue than it is to do a $4 million bond issue. So instead of doing this as a bond issue today, and then coming back 2 years from now and saying, okay, we're going to do another one for a street project, and then we're going to do another, we just lump it all together. And the bond anticipation notes that we hold internally give us the ability to do that, because we can just float it along until we have enough accumulated together that we're going to do a
Now,
$20
now
million
let me ask you
issue.
about the bond anticipation notes. Is there an interest rate tied to that, or is it just said, we hold the money and if we pay it back, there's no interest, we don't pay our interest to ourselves, and if we have $500,000, we just pay it off, or do we have to pay interest on those bond anticipation notes?
That's a good question for our bond counsel. I don't think we have to, since we're holding them ourselves. I mean, we can buy our own bonds at 0%. I don't think there's anything to prevent us from doing
Well,
that.
because I think our goal would be, we don't want to spend more money than we have to, right? So
Right.
we're trying to find the most cost-effective way to accomplish the goal.
Right. The point of the notes is just to get those i's dotted and t's crossed now, so that when we get into the future. And one of the things with bond issues is we do what are called refunding issues sometimes. As long as rates are low enough, if you do a refunding issue, you shorten the term of the bond. So in other words, when we issue bonds, and it's a little confusing, because when you think of like a home mortgage, there's one interest rate for the entire 30 years of the mortgage. When we issue bonds, we issue 20-year bonds, and everybody thinks that's a 20-year bond, but it's really not. We issue a 1-year bond and a 2-year bond and a 3-year bond and so on. And the interest rates are different on all those. The 20 years typically are higher and the 1 years are lower. Well, if you refinance halfway through, what used to be an 11-year bond is now 1, what used to be 12 is now 2. So the rate, even if interest rates haven't changed at all in the interim, you're still going to get a savings because you're issuing shorter terms by 8, 10 years, whatever, when you're doing the refinancing. So we do have some refinancing opportunities coming up in a few years. And we don't, I mean, I can't tell you right now if those are going to be viable. It depends on where interest rates are when we get there. But that is something we would lump in with this, and then we might do some other issue for street projects or something, and that's how we
You
get to
also
a.
mentioned in the payback of these bond anticipation notes to ourselves or whatever, in a general situation before you talk to us that borrowing $1 million, it's about $70,000 a year debt service payment.
That's a really ballpark figure, but yeah,
But so the question is, if you do 8 million, right, so now you got,
560.
so do we have to pay ourselves back 560 a year, or are you just saying, when you say that you gotta show that you're paying it down, what do we have to pay down?
Okay, so bond, that's a bond council question, but there's percentages that you have to hit. You can't float the bond on something for the entire 20 years. You've got to be paying it off over time. So she would be able to give that to us to say, okay, within 2 years, we've got to pay down X, within 3 years, we've got to pay down Y, et cetera. So with these bond anticipation notes, because it's a very good question, we can't carry the 8 million
Forever.
for 5 years. There's going to be a schedule, which we'll get from the bond council, that will say, okay, now next year when you renew these, you're not renewing 8, you're renewing, and I don't know what this number is, that's what we pay bond council for, we're going to renew 7.8. And then the year after that, we're going to renew 7.6, and so on.
And we can get out of it at any time. Let's say, for example, things are going well enough where we say, we're just gonna do an internal advance and we're gonna cover it from the court paying us back, and we'll just manage it internally, because we don't wanna go out and borrow, because the interest rates are never gonna come down enough for us to do that.
Yeah, we could always walk away. We could always get to 3 years away, 3 years down the road and say, okay, the stupid bond thing, we don't want to do this anymore. We're just going to call it a day and pay it off and walk away. The problem with that is, once you walk away, if you come back a year later and say, hey, we want to issue that bond now, you can't. Because those bond anticipation notes are the only way we preserve that ability to
No,
borrow.
the only reason I think we're doing this is because fortunately, again, we have enough, we've done a great job, the department has done a great job, we have enough money to do it. And I thoroughly believe that if you do a project, you better be able to pay for it yourself. And we can. So the question is, we just want to have the best option that's, the most cost-effective manner, and leave our options open, like you're saying, with the anticipation notes, we could do that. And, right now, it looks like we got to get the exact numbers, and you could calculate that out, but I'm close to about 3,413,000 each, that we'd have to each come up with to satisfy. And this is, knock on wood, it could be lower if they come back and those allowances or something doesn't hit, those numbers could go down. Sure. And we're hopeful that that's going to happen, but we have no idea, right? We have no idea. So does everybody understand it? Does everybody feel comfortable with that? Judge, do you have any questions on, does that kind of like feel?
It does end up being sort of an analysis. Okay, if you go the bond route, you borrow, 8 million, you sit on the anticipatory notes for some period of time, that leads you down one path. If we max out with cash on hand and borrow a smaller amount, that's a second path. Or if we just pay the whole thing off, obviously then there's no borrowing. And at the end of the day, as you and I have discussed, that special projects fund does what it does. It generates money as it is, and we can make allocations every year to cover our half of the rent and whatever
Well-
else we can contribute to either debt retirement or, you know,
Remember what Keith is saying, we're not gonna borrow any money, we're gonna front the cash ourselves internally, and
well,
then
he's
later
talking
on.
about, he's talking about bonds, he's talking about anticipatory bonds. But the bottom line is, if we do it with cash on hand, obviously, we're not borrowing as much, and we have none of the intricacies of sitting on the anticipatory notes or eventually issuing things or squaring up with
No,
the.
I get it, but I don't think, we're not borrowing any money, so, I mean,
We're keeping the option
We're keeping the option open.
Right.
That's
Yeah.
what it's about.
yeah, we're putting cash in.
Well, does the issuance of anticipatory notes, or actually issuing those, does that go against the city's, like, borrowing limits?
It does, but we're way under our limits.
Okay,
So yeah, we have a lot of room there. That's something else that bond council will run an analysis of.
right.
So they will put a more definitive number on that than way under.
Perfect.
But
So, yeah, no, I appreciate what you're saying, but I think the good thing is, we don't have to borrow.
Understood.
And the good thing is, we have money available. Most cities wouldn't be able to do this, but we're able to do this to be able to satisfy a project. And fortunately or unfortunately, we're in a time of construction, which there's so much uncertainty that nobody likes uncertainty, especially probably the contractors. They probably wake up in the middle of the night wondering, what's gonna, what's
Yeah,
gonna happen the next day.
the more normal run of this, you understand it with the bond anticipation notes, is if we didn't have the money, we'd issue
right.
bond anticipation notes that a bank would buy, and then we'd carry those until we were ready to do the bond issue, and then we'd issue bonds, and that's how we'd pay for the project. We don't need to do that because we have the cash, so we're just gonna hold them internally, but we're still gonna run through the
Well, and I guess
hoops.
we want to know, at least I do want to know, I would imagine the rest of the council wants to know, what's the cost of that? Not only, I know the legal cost of that, but is there any additional cost that we have to worry about that maybe we'd say, you know what, this is too much money, it's, why are we doing this? I guess that's the question I would want to know. I wouldn't want to spend like $300,000 for no reason.
I'm sure bond council's not gonna charge us $300,000 to write up this ordinance, so
No.
I will talk to
Well, yeah,
her about
the
what that's.
repayment, they make us charge interest to ourselves or something. Maybe we say, you know what, we don't want to charge interest to ourselves.
I mean, I really don't think that they're going to.
Okay.
Even if they did, the interest would be paid to the general fund, and there's nothing to prevent you from just giving it back.
I guess
I
you're-
mean, the general fund is allowed to transfer money, so even if they came in and said, okay, you have to charge interest, and it's $300,000, okay, that's $300,000 we take out of 301 and 169 and put in general, and you have the authority to do whatever you want with the general fund money, I mean, within reason, you certainly have the authority to take that $300,000 and transfer it back to the two funds that just paid it as a transfer.
I'm
So
just-
even if
I'm
we
just
did have to
pressing,
do
to make
interest,
sure that, make
we
sure
could
that-
always just give it back.
So, to go over this again so everybody understands, right now, there is, as I mentioned, $3 million in the 169 account, Keith. So we're gonna spend that down to 500,000. You're gonna keep $500,000 in the 169 account, because you need that money in there for the next year's lease payment or whatever it is. And it's gonna build up, you're gonna keep charging funds. So that, in that fund we're talking about now, what is your anticipation? Do you anticipate evaluating how much money's coming in, where you stand? Do you need to modify the fee? Is there any kind of thought about that? Did you think about that, Judge, at all, or anything, or?
Well, yeah, we thought about, because there are multiple purposes for which these special project funds can be adopted and earmarked. So we haven't actually resolved entirely whether we might not have a separate special project fund that just covers rent obligations. So it'll be a smaller number, and it will be collected on every case, and it would be earmarked just for our half of the the annual rent. So no, we haven't exhausted that,
Okay.
that discussion either. And we've got reserve funds for, technology issues, which we plan on applying to some of these technology line items. They may, one, help us avoid dipping into the allowance. Two, they may come in under the 700 that's already in there. So that's another place that we can go to help offset some of the costs that show up in this. I want you to be convinced that we're trying every bit as hard as you are to manage the way this thing unfolds. But so far, taking 2.2 out of that $13 million estimate has been a welcome change in the project. It really has.
No, we totally understand it, we totally get it. We're just a little, we never like to spend money, right? So
Really?
we're just trying to figure a way to make sure we do this the most economically way possible, and to be able to be fair, not only to the citizens of Medina, but but to be fair to all those other people that use the court.
Yeah, you were summarizing the funding sources. I'm making notes. You want to finish your
Okay, I'm
analysis
sorry.
there?
Yeah, so you'll totally spend it, that I calculate, out of your 169 fund towards the court project, 4,626,830. That's what I get. That's how much you'll contribute to it. And since the total project that I calculated it as is 11,453,743, that's with the construction and the architect fee of 720. If you take that number that I just gave you, 4,626,830 off of that, there's left over 6,826,913. That's what we share 50-50. So the city comes out of the account 301 or whatever other fund we come out, 3,413,456, and the court special projects fund, that's the same number you have to contribute. And that gets us to our number, and that, we are hopeful that number will go down, but that's right now, the guaranteed maximum price is that number.
Correct. That adds up.
Does everybody understand that?
Yes, Pat's got something.
Yes.
Just to be clear, those numbers aren't totally, we have some minor, like the legal ads we had to run, tree removal was a couple thousand.
Okay,
There's-
yeah, I
It's
mean-
not much, but it's.
The contingency
15,
stuff may be able to cover that anyway.
Yeah.
So that's minor compared to what we're talking about, yeah. You're talking something like under $20,000 or something, or 25,000, so it's, and then hopefully the contingency will cover that. Go ahead.
And
Are there
we've,
any-
yeah, we've already made our withdrawals for those expenses as well.
Yeah, I already told you, yeah, your withdrawals are on here that I think, Keith, you gave us this, or somebody gave us this.
Are there any funds left over from GMP 1 or 2 that we can apply to 3?
There is a small amount. I just emailed Pat before this meeting. We did have a few small amounts, roughly $15,000 to $20,000 from the demo and abatement that we were carrying for some unforeseen that were trending to the good. And then there was the enabling project that we started with where, we had to divide that storage room to create that corridor coming across. We had a small amount of like $8,000 savings there. So
So we can use that to cover the items we just discussed
yeah,
here.
we
then.
are collecting a little bit as we go.
Every little bit helps.
That's
All
right.
right.
So Keith, going to you now on the city side of the 301 account that has 3,176,666 and is growing, what do you suggest we take out of there, and what do you suggest should we leave in there and borrow from the general fund?
Well, there's not really a problem with taking that fund to zero because we could always borrow from the general fund later. I mean, it really doesn't matter whether we do it now or do it later. So I would zero that out before you take anything out of general fund.
Okay.
Just because we don't, I mean, we can take it from the general fund
Well, yeah,
whenever
there's
we want.
3,176,000, like I said, and we owe 3,413,000, so is that not big of a difference?
No.
So,
And I mean, we're bringing 800,000 over the course of the year, so
so it'll cover itself, most likely.
we may need an advance to get through the year, but I mean, and maybe into next year, but nothing
Well, it
beyond.
depends when all these fees are due, right? I mean, we're not paying upfront the 7.6
No,
million.
all these contracts are as they're, there's
Yes. So we
benchmarks
may
they
have
hit
the
and we
money,
write
we
checks.
may have that money by the time the contracts are paid, because
Right.
what's the estimated completion date of the court again?
April is the anticipated move-in date. March of next year would be the substantial completion. So roughly a year away.
So, yeah, we've got another year worth of revenue between now and when we're paying the last of these checks.
Right. But yeah, as mentioned, and the judge is correct, this has been going on for 20 years, and I have a lot of emails, Judge. So,
Oh, don't I know it?
it's been going on a long time, and it has been a challenge, right? We always struggled with this, because this is a huge cost, right?
Right.
And I think we struggle with it, at least I struggle with it, is that it's not only for the city, that's what I struggle with. Why does the city, and I get it, the Ohio Revised Code says so, I don't care what it says, but it seems fairer that everybody share in the cost rather than the person that just has to pay for it as a city, because our residents, they're saying, well, why am I paying for all that?
Right.
I don't want to pay for that. Well, thanks to the senators and the House representatives in the state of Ohio for saddling us with it, I guess. I mean, years ago, I guess it would have been. But does anybody have any questions about that, or where do we go from here, or anything? Anything you want to add, or is it clear as mud, or where do we stand?
I just have a question about, so you said that the contracts have all been bid, and you have all those, right? Okay. And that this trade embargo, whatever's going on, is not going to affect that, correct? Is that what you said? I want to make sure.
We just don't know yet. I mean, if we follow along here, today is April 9th. So in theory, I think next Monday, there's another finance meeting, and then the formal approval of this could take place in a couple weeks, the 28th. So if all goes as planned, we would basically be issuing subcontracts to, let's just say, electrical contractors, mechanical, plumbing equipment, et cetera, in the days following that. So we just don't know where things will be at that time. I mean, anybody, you know, when we were gathering estimates from people, they were basically saying, when are you gonna award? When can we know? How long do I have to hold my price for?
Well, we're just hopeful
Well-
that President Trump doesn't change his mind between now and then.
Well, right, yeah, but what happens if it does? I mean,
Well-
where's that, I mean,
We're on a roller coaster.
yeah, I know. So, I guess, I'm just wondering, so you're saying everything was, or you tried to locally source, keep it, you know, okay, but maybe there's this part that comes from this part that comes from, and is gonna be tariffed.
Right.
We
It's,
have no
it's a
idea.
totally valid question. The way we see this typically is, we would get notice to proceed from the city. We would immediately start issuing subcontracts and purchase orders to lock things in. So at that point, if we're buying something for, say, an electrical contractor, start buying your wire, your panels, any of your switches, et cetera, things like that, he's going to follow probably in the weeks following us. So it kind of trickles down the line. He may have everything locked in, but before it ships, his vendor, who maybe has something, you know, third hand for his subcontract, says, I can't do that at that price anymore, I just can't. I need more money. So at that point, we would fall back on our subcontract language, and we would say, listen, we have an agreed price, et cetera, et cetera. And he says, well then, you know, it's like we talked about a little bit this morning. At that point, we're over a barrel, so to speak, because we only have two options. We could say, forget it, you're in default of your contract, and he says, I don't care, I can't provide it at that price.
It's not gonna work for free.
Right. Or if we want to turn the project over on time, we're either going to scramble to try and find somebody else to do it for the same price, or we're just going to have something to dip out of that pocket and keep it going. And trust me, I'm the last person that wants to let somebody off the hook for an agreed upon deal, but in the interest of keeping the project moving forward and turning it over on the date that we said we're going to, I think it's the smart moves to keep some of that back. And, you know, we would all be working open, transparent on what that contract language would be, what that vendor's potential claim would be, whether or not we feel it has standing, whether or not we think it's the right thing to do.
So what happens when, and I'm just projecting here, but what happens when they say, okay, I'll be able to hold that price, however, I'm not gonna be able to get the material for another 12 weeks? When, I mean, how much is that gonna push this back and push that back, and where's that cost gonna come from?
That's my job. That's what I do every day.
All right,
You like
That's
that
what I
answer?
do. Those are the conversations that I have day in and day out. And before we lock something in, we tell people, send me an updated ship date, right? Send it to me in writing. Make sure that you can meet the schedule that we've prepared. And if they have any, you know, wobbliness or unsure, I might be ready to move to the next vendor. So those are the conversations we have.
Just a quick question. How's it going so far?
It's going good. The last couple days, I mean, my phone's been ringing. People want to know. They want to know how they look. They're interested. I've had, you know, a couple plumbing and mechanical contractors. They're willing to hold their number. They're excited.
And how did the GMP 1 and 2 go from your projections? I mean, did you find anything that was a surprise? Is there anything that was different than you anticipated?
1 and 2, the demo and the abatement was probably more surprised just because I think just the location of this project and the size of it really made it a sweet spot for the contractor that got it. Precision Environmental. They're a great outfit, and this was right in their alley. Location-wise, size-wise, the timing of it was perfect for them. And we got a really good number from them. We had to do more homework on the second package with the concrete, the masonry. It felt like there was a lot of people that maybe were already booked for the same time frame that we're looking for here. We really had to, you know, sort of beat the bushes to make sure that we got contractors and numbers. But so far with this package, we got good coverage. We had a lot of interest, and I mean, it's always the saying, you want 3 numbers, and we got 3 numbers, and then some for these packages.
Good.
One thing, John, I can bring up, we noticed last week, and they've carried an allowance for it, $25,000. Just after we pulled up some flooring, we noticed the subfloor was just not going to be adequate. It'd been designed to, just, we'd use it. That was a surprise. They had to carry an allowance because that's going to have to be replaced. That's the kind of thing you find now, but we pretty much have everything torn up, so I don't anticipate a whole lot more.
Right, and that's a safe number. I think, for us to tear out all of that plywood, rerun new, and get it all prepped, I mean, the anticipation when we removed the old flooring was that was gonna be concrete, like the rest of the floors, but it wasn't. That's at the north end of the building, I think part of that connector that goes to the 1800 building. So that was a bit of a surprise, but I think, we can make that work, and again, we're carrying an allowance there. That's money that we want to be everybody's opinion and full transparency on how that's spent. That is not in any contractor's pocket at this time.
Anybody have any other questions? Paul, Jim, anybody?
Great job, everybody.
Is everybody okay with all that? This is unbelievable. We may have come to full circle. Yeah. So I guess we could just hope that, yeah, we better knock on wood, that, things in the economy hopefully continue not to go the wrong way, whatever that means. Just stabilize a little bit, have some certainty for a while until we buy all the stuff, then it can go on all uncertain again if it wants to. But I think that we have a plan, we have a path forward that Keith is going to work on, and we'll get the final numbers together. And I guess we can move this forward, and it'll go to finance on Monday. And then we'll go through the information. And if we can have the better numbers, I don't know if you can work that up by Monday, so we can know what the exact numbers are we're dealing with, and then we can move it forward. That'll be great. Pat?
Yeah, one thing, I did submit the request to council yesterday for the approval of GMP3. I had suggested the account numbers and dollar values completely different from what we just talked about. I'm assuming Keith knows how to adjust those, so just as long as Lori knows, that's the big thing.
We understand. That's why you're an engineer. We get it. Okay. We
There
just
is
wanna-
one more item on the agenda, though, the owner's contingency, the design contingency. Wanted to talk about that.
Okay.
That is money, and I'm going to let, Nancy came all this way, we'll let her talk a little bit. But yeah, why don't you just maybe explain what that is for everybody?
So there's, as the contractor is holding allowances for unforeseen things or things we might think we might come up against, there's also a recommendation for the owner to hold a contingency, certain amount of money, again, for changes they might want to make. We get into something, we see an issue, we're like, this would really be better if we do this versus that. It's just wise to have the kind of a pot of money set aside for any of those kind of things that might come up. You may not use it, you may use a part of it, and in our experience working in the public realm, it's a lot easier to go ahead and get that contingency included now and approved once so that we don't have to come back and, as Mike started to say, we come up against something, well, we need another $10,000. We got to come back to council to get approval for that. So we get those built in now, then at the end of the project, you get money back. And it just saves a lot of time and keeps the project moving forward if we have a contingency that's set aside. And again, none of that funds get used without clearly identifying what the issue is, what the costs are, vetting it with the contractor, vetting it with the city before it gets approved to be used. But we don't have to come back to council for that.
And that's the $200,000 number you're talking about.
Well, I submitted yesterday at 250. Nancy recommended 200, Rulon recommended 300, so I went 250. But just to add on to Nancy's point, that money, that's not an open checkbook for Rulon. We would have to agree upon a cost, and we would have to bring it to Board of Control to get authorization. But that's a quick, simple process. It's, just want to make sure it's not.
Well, make sure Keith has all those, the final
That's in my
projections.
request. That's included in the request. So.
Yeah, because I printed out well, it's in your request, but when you gave us this, it says 200.
Yeah, I added 50 to it. But I guess the point is, that's a suggestion based on what Rulon and Branstetter recommended. We could go zero. We don't think that's a good idea.
No, I
but
don't think it should be zero, but I mean.
It's up to council. If you prefer 200, we could, it's really.
Well,
up
you
to
know what I
us.
prefer, but I guess what
Yeah.
everybody else prefer.
I think the 250, that's what the engineer asked for, that way it gives them enough
You
room,
guys like this?
so we don't slow it down.
I know, you're never not.
And again, that's
don't slow
controlled
it
by
down.
Board of Control. That all this have to go to.
But that's
Board
what
of
my
Control.
wife says, she gives me the money, you don't have to spend it straight now, I'm not gonna spend it, what do? I spend it.
You notice that? His wife gives him the money.
That's true, I'm not allowed to have it, I guess. No, but I appreciate that, and I guess that's fine. Just make sure Keith has the updated numbers, so when he gives those projections, we're pretty close. I know it could modify a little bit, but we gotta be pretty close. We don't wanna be, far off from what we really anticipate each, our contributions and what it's gonna be, and the bond anticipation notes and all the other stuff that we gotta do. We wanna make sure we're close. Judge, you have anything else to add? Pat, anything else?
Just, there are two other expenses coming down the road. The city has to hire the independent testing inspection for like concrete and anything else, steel. We're estimating about 10,000. And the city has committed to install the fire line from the city main on Broadway to 5 foot outside of the building. That's gonna be about 35,000.
Does Nino know about that?
He does.
Okay, he's not here. I
He's
just
gonna be
wanted-
out there digging the
That's what I
trench.
figured. That's why I wanted to make sure he knows. Dan, do you got anything to add? Is it all going to be okay with your department to do all the inspections and get everything? Okay. Okay. Right. Correct. Anybody?
Mr. President,
Yes.
yeah, it occurred to me, I just wanted to, on behalf of the court, to thank the city council for walking this project forward like it has over the last several months. I know you guys have been at this way longer than I have personally, but we're all grateful from our side that some of these problems that this building has been dealing with for 20 years are going to be solved finally, and we appreciate your help in getting that done.
Thank you.
Well, it also helps us because we have problems that we're starting to realize now and having a study done with our buildings and space and all this other stuff. So you're actually going to help us out a little bit. So by moving, no offense, but it'll help us. All right.
Next week.
All right. If there's nothing else, the meeting is adjourned. Thank you.
Thanks, Judge.